Once considered generous neighbors, 71% of Canadians have now distanced themselves, leaving behind a $1.4 billion economic gap and tens of thousands of displaced U.S. workers. While President Trump continues his rhetoric about making Canada the 51st state, Canadians have quietly retaliated, delivering a bitter farewell with no warning. For decades, cross-border shopping was a vital part of life for many Canadians. But since the beginning of 2025, this trend seems to have ended. Canadians have collectively stopped spending at U.S. stores, causing a sharp drop in revenue, as reflected in numbers that do not lie. Once bustling streets now feel eerily empty. At Peacebridge, traffic fell by 12% in just 1 month. Even worse, at Rainbow Bridge, the decline was a staggering 33%, a drop that is truly unsettling. It is as if a third of their regular customers disappeared overnight. This immediate absence has delivered a heavy blow to local budgets. Erie County, New York, lost nearly $5 million in taxes almost overnight. These numbers are not just statistics. They represent real struggles for Americans across the border. For years, Canadian shoppers were not just customers. They were the lifeblood of many U.S. businesses. They accounted for up to 70% of weekend revenue, a staggering number that showed just how dependent the U.S. was. From Walmart to local coffee shops, they kept it all going. But now, they have stopped. Why? Because the economic calculations that once brought them south no longer add up. The Canadian dollar has weakened, travel costs have risen sharply, and new U.S. tariffs have dampened their once strong loyalty. What was once an affordable iPhone is now a luxury item. And in this context, Canadian retailers have seized the opportunity, offering better services at home, leaving no reason for Canadians to cross the border anymore. What is even more striking is that this shift is not a passing phase. A survey from Business Wire revealed a harsh truth. 71% of Canadians have decided to buy fewer U.S. goods, with a quarter of them viewing this as a permanent choice. This collective shift has created a domino effect, crushing everything in its path. Major retail chains were the first to feel the impact. Target saw sales and foot traffic plummet, acknowledging the bleak future ahead. Walmart, while trying to hold strong, could not hide the truth. Its border stores are slowly dying with piled-up inventory and empty aisles. But the pain does not stop with large corporations. It is rippling through every corner of the economy. The souvenir industry is at risk of losing up to $350 million. Small shops, once sustained by generous tourists, are now left with dust-covered shelves. The tech and pharmaceutical industries have not been spared either. Electronic store revenues dropped by 6.7%. A telling number. Why drive for hours to buy an overpriced phone or a bottle of medicine when they can order it online with convenience and guaranteed safety? And finally, behind the millions of lost dollars lie real human tragedies. The U.S. Travel Association, USA, reported in February that a 10% drop in Canadian tourists could put 140,000 jobs at risk and cause a $2.1 billion loss in spending. Forbes estimated that a 30% drop in Canadian visitors could cost the U.S. economy $6 billion. These are lost shifts, lost part-time jobs, and struggles for students and single mothers. The entire ecosystem that Americans once took pride in has collapsed. Empty gas stations, quiet coffee shops, a haunting emptiness now pervades what was once a bustling scene. Canadians have not just changed their shopping habits. They have made a conscious decision, a clear assertion of their national pride and values. They have found fulfillment right at home, and that means the fun across the border is truly over. The confrontation began over a $2 billion tax Canada wanted to impose on tech giants. When President Trump announced the suspension of negotiations, Canada immediately responded by imposing a 50% tariff on U.S. goods, pushing the two allies into a fierce trade war. The fire started with Canada's Digital Services Tax, DST. This wasn't a random invention designed to provoke Washington. DST is a reasonable effort following global trends to force the tech giants to contribute a fraction of the benefits they've gained from Canadian citizens. A 3% tax on domestic revenue worth about $2 billion. For anyone with logical thinking, this is a fair policy. But Trump didn't react like a president protecting his nation's economy. He acted like a personal lawyer defending the profits of his clients in power. He immediately declared the end of all trade talks and issued an ultimatum as if to a colony. Canada would have 7 days to face the consequences. In stark contrast to the Southern explosion, Ottawa's response was almost hauntingly calm. The Prime Minister's office simply issued a statement saying they will continue to engage in complex negotiations with the U.S. for the benefit of workers and businesses. While Trump was still typing away in anger, he likely didn't anticipate that Ottawa had already prepared a meticulously calculated response. Shortly after Trump's announcement, Ottawa struck back with a 50% tariff on imports exceeding quotas. Canada slapped its own 50% tariff on $22 billion of U.S. metals. As billions of dollars in bilateral trade were at risk, a key question emerged. Will Carney's hardline stance weaken the U.S.-Canada alliance, or will it force Washington to return to the negotiating table? Canada's 50% tariff move was a masterstroke. It didn't attack Canadian consumers. It targeted the wallets and production plans of American tech giants. The standoff immediately caused powerful ripples across global markets. On the London Metal Exchange, LME, the price of cold-rolled steel futures surged by $60 per ton, just 1 week after Canada's announcement. Aluminum prices also spiked past $2,540 per ton, reaching the highest levels in 8 months. This indicates market concern over supply security, especially regarding Canada's low-carbon aluminum supply, which is crucial. This strategy zeroed in on U.S. semi-finished metals, especially cold-rolled steel. To understand why this was such a sophisticated attack, we need to look at the Detroit-Toronto Industrial Corridor, one of the world's most integrated automotive supply chains. The process works in a closed loop. U.S. steel mills in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania produce coil steel and export it to Canada. There, Canadian suppliers, primarily in Ontario, use this steel to forge vital car parts, like chassis or body panels. These parts are then exported back to assembly plants in the U.S. for Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. When Canada imposed a 50% tariff on U.S. steel coils, it precisely targeted the most crucial link in this chain. This immediately raised input costs for Canadian parts manufacturers, and this cost was passed directly to American car giants at the final stage, creating a domino effect that Washington could not ignore. According to internal sources, Canadian officials had carefully modeled their actions before taking them. They calculated that the retaliatory tariffs would increase the production cost of each Detroit-Toronto pickup SUV by $850 CAD. This blow was extremely well placed. For example, a Ford F-150 priced at 60,000 CAD costing 55,000 CAD to make generates a profit of 5,000 CAD. With the new Canadian tariff, the cost rises by 850 CAD, and the profit drops to 4,150 CAD, a 17% loss. American automakers are now caught in a tough spot. The Canadian market is filled with Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai, brands unaffected by the retaliatory tariffs. If Ford raises prices, customers will switch to the Toyota Tundra. U.S. corporations are forced to sacrifice profits to keep their prices competitive. This is a direct hit because it doesn't target Canadian consumers, but instead strikes straight at the pockets of American corporate shareholders and executives who have the loudest voices in Washington. The most direct and painful, American automakers are now caught in a tough spot. The Canadian market is filled with Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai, brands unaffected by the retaliatory tariffs. If Ford raises prices, customers will switch to the Toyota Tundra. U.S. corporations are forced to sacrifice profits to keep their prices competitive. This is a direct hit because it doesn't target Canadian consumers, but instead strikes straight at the pockets of American corporate shareholders and executives who have the loudest voices in Washington. The most direct and painful impact will be felt in the labor market. Experts estimate that if the flow of raw steel from Canada is disrupted, 4,200 jobs in Ohio and 3,600 jobs in Pennsylvania could be lost. Canada officially cuts ties with the U.S. The 47th president faces a backlash from a close ally, Liberation Day or Day of Demise. The 2nd of April, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed. President Donald Trump proudly declared that the day he imposed global tariffs would be the Liberation Day for the U.S. economy, freeing it from dependence on imported goods. He believes that tariffs will protect domestic jobs and reduce reliance on other countries. However, just hours after this announcement, both the U.S. and Canada reacted strongly. Critics have called it a self-destructive explosion, which not only negatively impacts the U.S., but also significantly affects economies worldwide. Canada reacts strongly. Liberation Day is Termination Day. While Trump proudly declares liberating the U.S. economy, Canada, one of the U.S.'s closest partners, responds decisively. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has bluntly called this decision the termination day for the U.S.-Canada relationship. So these tariffs is nothing but a tax on Americans. Ford emphasizes that Trump's imposition of tariffs on imports will lead to severe consequences for the U.S., including higher prices for food, cars, medications, and other essential goods. And President Trump calls it Liberation Day. I call it Termination Day because a lot of people are going to be terminated from their jobs, Ford sarcastically stated. He even added, Trump says that increasing the prices of food and cars is liberation. Seems like he's liberating people from their bank accounts, market reactions, and the stock market crash. As soon as news of the tariffs was announced, the U.S. stock market immediately plunged. Dow Jones dropped more than 1,000 points, and NASDAQ was in the red. Analysts and international financial institutions like Fitch warned that this policy not only puts the U.S. economy at risk of recession, but could also trigger a global economic crisis. Barron magazine issued a serious warning. The pain from the stock market is just beginning. This indicates that the tax policies Trump has implemented are not only affecting big corporations, but also profoundly impacting the lives of American citizens. From consumer prices to their ability to save and invest, Canada declares the end of the old partnership era. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations, is over. Not stopping at opposing Trump's tariff policies, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney publicly declared that the traditional U.S.-Canada relationship is over. He stated that Canada no longer wishes to engage in political mind games with the White House, where policies change continuously without stability. Carney and the Canadian government have prepared retaliatory measures to respond to Trump's decisions. Public opinion in Canada is now fumbling, and the people and businesses are ready to face the hardships to protect national interests. Canada seeks new allies. Amid rising tensions with the U.S., Canada has begun seeking new trade partners. Prime Minister Carney embarked on diplomatic trips to France and the UK, affirming that Canada will work to strengthen ties with other nations to reduce reliance on the U.S. This marks a fundamental shift in Canada's foreign policy. No longer willing to be influenced by the unexpected and ill-advised decisions from the White House, Canada is trying to build an economic fortress with strategic partners in Europe and Asia to ensure sustainable development in the future. Will the U.S.-C relationship continue to be rebuilt, or will Trump's policies push the two nations into an inevitable confrontation? A 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff. Trump imposes car tariffs. American cars soar in price. Car prices are skyrocketing. A $48,000 car could now jump to $60,000. While American consumers face the pain of rising prices, workers are left jobless. And meanwhile, China is laughing behind the scenes. Ford F-150, the American car symbol, is no longer true. Let's start with the Ford F-150, one of the best-selling cars and a symbol of American cars. But did you know even this vehicle is not completely made in the U.S.? Although the Ford F-150 is assembled in the U.S., It contains up to 30,000 parts produced in more than 24 different countries. For example, alternators from Mexico, wheels from South Korea, drive shafts from Canada. These parts are all subject to 25% tariffs due to Trump's policies. With key components coming from abroad, this tariff will cause unexpected consequences for U.S. automakers. Car price increase, significant cost rise. Automakers in the U.S. are now facing higher tariffs, leading to increased car production costs. Just the import tariffs on parts from Canada and Mexico could raise the price of a vehicle by around $3,000 per car. Additionally, tariffs on parts imported from other countries, such as wheels from South Korea, will cause the price to rise by another $3,000 to $6,000. On top of that, tariffs on steel and aluminum, essential materials, will add an additional $400 to $600. As a result, a car priced at $48,000 could increase to $60,000, which will definitely force consumers to pay higher prices for every car they purchase. Business is coming back to the United States so that they don't have to pay tariffs. Will tariffs bring factories back to the U.S.? Trump's goal is to force automakers to move production back to the U.S., creating more jobs for Americans. However, the reality is quite different. Instead of creating jobs for workers, companies may choose to automate production to reduce costs. Shifting entire production to the U.S. is not an easy task. One study shows that if automakers want to move the entire supply chain back to the U.S., it could take years and cost billions of dollars. Not to mention the risks of lower quality and delayed production timelines. The U.S. auto industry sane in turmoil. The U.S. automotive industry had built a strong supply chain system based on cooperation and free trade with countries like Mexico and Canada. However, with the new tariff policies, Trump has disrupted this foundation, causing chaos in production and logistics. These changes not only disrupt the supply chain but also increase production costs, putting automakers under significant pressure regarding pricing. Instead of focusing on advancing technology and producing new cars, automakers now have to focus on debating whether to import parts from Mexico or Canada, or if they can find alternative domestic sources. These debates prevent them from concentrating on innovation, which is essential to maintaining global competitiveness. China outpaces the fast win over the slow. While the U.S. is struggling with its tariff policies, China has quickly developed and is now becoming the world's largest car exporter. This has made industry experts reconsider America's strategy. An automotive expert once said, "It's not the strong swallowing the weak, but the fast beating the slow." And right now, America is falling behind. China has begun to dominate the global car market, while the U.S. is still caught in debates over tariffs and chaos in the supply chain. Will the U.S. maintain its leadership in the automotive industry, or will it be overtaken by competitors like